Where are the Yidden over here? Doesn't make sense, no one is on. Try this again. Nachamo. There we go.
Recording in progress.
All right, the oil is schluffing. All right.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's 3 Prakim Rambam Hilchos Avodas Kochavim V'chukas Hagoyim Prakim Dalid, Hey, and Vav. We're going to start with Perek Dalid. Perek Dalid speaks about the din of the Ir Hanidachas. Now, 2 details of this din. You're going to have the people, in plural, that are trying to convince or trying to lead inhabitants of a city to, God forbid, practice idolatry. So we're going to learn about the dinim both on the enticers and on the very unique din that happens in certain circumstances to the inhabitants of the city and their possessions. Perek Revi'ah has 16 halachas. We have the Sugi in Sanhedrin, Daf Samach Gimel, Daf Samach Zayin, V'chulei, starting with halacha Aleph. Says Rambam, Madichei Ir mi Yisrael, people in plural who lead the inhabitants of a city in the Holy Land to serve idolatry. So then, Harei Elu Niskalim Shuki, this refers not to the worshippers of idols, but to the people that were Madiach, to the enticers. Now, Chavra, not to confuse this at all with the din of one person who's trying to proselytize, trying to convince another or others. That's the din of the Maces. That will be the next chapter. Of course, there are many similarities, but there's something extraordinarily unique about the din of the Ir Hanidachas, which is this chapter. Now, even if the ones who are enticing the others, the ones who are trying to convince the others, even though they themselves did not worship idols, what was their sin? They convinced the people in their city to worship idols. Not they attempted to convince. They got them to actually worship it. That is where we have the din, with many other qualifications, that the Madichim are going to be stoned to death. In other words, they're not stoned to death because they worshipped idols. They're stoned to death because they got, as we'll see, many pratim, the majority of most cities, not every city, but many cities to serve idols. Okay? Every word is meduyak, and we'll appreciate this a lot more when we contrast this with the din of the next chapter, which is similar. You know, when things are similar but they're not the same, you mamash see the difference. Now, the people that worshipped Avodah Zarah, what's normally the din for someone who worships idols? It's good to remember, skila. Skila is a misa chamura. Sayif, beheading, is considered the death that is less severe. They will be put to death by a death that's less severe, narogam b'sayif. Just to bring out the challenge, which will shed light. The key to this whole sugi is, just to know a klal, if someone, God forbid, violates 2 sins, Shuki, for which each one of them carries a death penalty. One is chamur and one is kal, relative. Which one is given? The chamur. The chamur. So here, you have a phenomena that you find nowhere else. They violated something, Avodah Zarah skila. The moment the majority of the Ir worships with them, now there is the din of Ir Hanidachas, they actually get a lesser type of death penalty. This has to be explained. And we're going to speak about a moededike insight that Rebbe used this to explain something that will be even more shocking. We'll get in a couple of halachas. Now, there are many qualifications for that. For who? That's only if they worshipped idols, not if they thought about it, if they actually did it. To the people in the city. Or if they didn't worship, but they said regarding whatever that getchke was, that idol is my God. Now, don't forget, we're putting the madiach, or the madichim, to death with skila. Where does the Torah say they may not do it? Shenemar, as it says, that loy yishama al pich. It's interesting. This pasuk is actually a pasuk in Mishpatim, even though the dir of the Inavidachas is going to be in Parshas Re'eh and in Parshas Shoiftim, we'll see. But there the Torah says, V'shem Elohim acherim loy saskiru. one should not mention it. V'lo yishama al picha, don't make other people mention it. It should not be heard because of you. That's the warning. Halacha beis. Now, qualifications to that. These proselytizers have to be from that very city, number one. Another qualification, they have to belong to the same tribe. Now, this, guys, the main parsha is in Parshas Re'eh. So this shenemar, as it says in Parshas Re'eh, mikir becha, really, if you know the whole pasuk, you'll put a comma here. And then you'll write vayadichos yoshri iram. But what we do is, for this drasha, we put it all together. Another din, the seducers, the ones who are leading others astray, unlike next chapter, unlike the din of Amesis, madichim iranidachas, if there are two or more, o yaser al shnaim, as it says yatzu anshe biniyal v'yadichos yoshvei iram in the plural, peoples. Another din is they have to get the majority of the inhabitants of the city to actually worship idols. Another din, let's go to numbers. That number has to be from 100, not 99, not 98. In other words, small villages, you can have a small village where 50 people are deraiv. You won't have this din, there'll be other dinim of next chapter. And ironically, the people who worship idols are going to get a misa chamura. There's no din of iranidachas. Another din, what happens if there's one city in Israel that is so large that the roiv of the people that live in the city comprise at that time the majority of the entire tribe? Then we also won't apply the din of Eirene Dachas. Now guys, no one is getting scot-free. Actually, ironically, if the people that worshipped are not going to be ruled by the din of Eirene Dachas, they're going to get skila because they worshipped an idol. And as we'll see in the next chapter, the ones who spoke to them, we'll see, there's a certain window where nishtahed and nishtahin. B'chlal, one person trying to proselytize, that's called the maces, is also someone who's chayiv skila. Okay. But if the majority of the tribe, which were also the Rev of that city, if they actually worshipped idols, so then we judge them like individuals. And the din is, Yaakov, remember, if a yachid serves an idol, death, skila, chamura. Only if they are now being judged as members of Anshi Irani Dachas are they going to be put to death by Yamisa Kala, because halachically we view beheading as less serious than stoning. That's a big difference. Aaron is laughing. It's much better. Machai, it's like a relief. All right. As it says, Yoshvei Ho'ir. So how do you know from the Yoshvei Ir? On one hand, a kfar katan, a village is not called an Ir. Now, if the majority of the people live, and they are the majority of the tribe, it's bigger than an Ir. So Yoshvei Ir both excludes less than 100, which will be a kfar katan. And if it's going to be the roiv of a shevet, that's called a krach gadol. And the Torah says here, that's how we get this minimum and maximum number. Another detail. Hidicho means if the ones who were convincing the others were either women or they were under bar mitzvah, or if only one male, or if the people in the city that actually worship was not the roiv of the city, or if they did it on their own, no one convinced them, or if those two could even be from the same shevet, who convinced Roiv from the 100, but they were michutz Allah, they don't live in the same city. In all of these cases, ein donen also donen badid irani dachas, elo harei hein. The individuals are yechidim that worshipped idols, and what's the din? V'soiklin kol misha avar. And another detail, that people who get sentenced to death, including for worshipping idols, don't lose their money. They're not living. So yeah, you can say they lose, but their money, their things go to their heirs. Unlike the din of Irani Dachas, as we'll see in a moment, that on one hand, the Misas Kala, on the other hand, all of their belongings will get destroyed. Okay, all capital punishments, guys, we are coming off the old cycle. Right, so what do we know that a bezdin of 3 cannot judge someone to death, but you can have a bezdin shel chav gimel. Irani dachas can only be by the great Sanhedrin. As it says, this is already in Parsha Shoiftim. For it says, so is isha hu, o yes isha hi, asher also sadavar haraza el shorecha. Shorecha means in your gate. Every Sanhedrin katana was by a gate. So from there we learn, since the Torah begins speaking about this man or that woman, individuals, yichidim neragim bezdin shel kol shar v'shar. which refers to the small Sanhedrin. Ve'ein hamerubin erogin elo bebeis hagadol nerumim means a entire city, which is the din of Ir Nidachas. Halacha Dalet. Ein achas mi ori hamiklat nasas Ir Nidachas. Chavra, how many cities were there in Ori Miklat? Guys, remember this. There's 6 cities of Levium plus another 42. Actually, when it comes to the ownership of the Levium over these cities, there's a big discussion, not for right now, and many differentiate the type of connection they have to the 6 versus the connection they have to the other 42. Not negea to this halacha. All of the 48 cities can never become an Ir Nidachas. Shenemar ba'achas orecha, and right, this pasuk seems to imply in your cities, and not what? And not cities that you don't own. Now, truth be told, that there's another exclusion for Yerushalayim, as the Rambam continues. Another din, not Yerushalayim can be counted in Nidachas because it was not divided by Shvatim. That's a Gemara in Bava Kama. Many, as the Rebbe points out, erroneously link that limud to also exclude the cities of the Levium, but connected. When the Rebbe spoke about this whole topic about their ownership, the 6 and the 42 are not the same. If the cities of the Levium would have been excluded from the Gemara Bava Kama, then we would not have come to the conclusion that none of the cities of the Miklat. Eloma, really, there's a Sefri Zuta. You have to know Kol HaTorah Kula. There's one medrash that is the source of the Rambam that was discovered. That's the Rebbe suggests that. The Rambam La'am also brings it down, but that was the Rebbe's chapi. You have to know Kol HaTorah Kula. There it says there's a pasuk concerning Odei Miklat Tihiyena Lochem. So the word Tihiyena, that medrash says Tanoim, it will always be, and if you'll destroy it, it won't be anymore. So from that Tihiyena we learn. Question is, the Rambam seems to be saying Ba'achas Orecha, and that's the big topic about the Orei Levium. Bottom line is, neither Orei Levium nor Yerushalayim. Ve'ein oisen Ir Nidachas basfar, any border town, you can't make it into a Ir Nidachas. We didn't learn this detail. Again, you destroy the whole city. A border city that gets destroyed makes Israel easier to conquer by our enemies. So you can never destroy it. Another than the Ein Beis Din Echad Oisa Shalosh Yeros Nedachazu B'Tzadzu. One Beis Din cannot make 3 cities that are mamish adjacent one to the other. You know what that implies? That if over time the next Sanhedrin made another city, that's okay. The same one cannot do it. But if the same Beis Din can make 3 cities, if they were distant one from the other. Halacha hey, ein oisen Ir Nidachas ad sheyadichua madicha b'lashon rabim. Another nuance. Not only do you have to have 2 from the same shevet, from the same city, but the words that they use has to be in the plural. The yomru, by them saying, "Let us go and worship, let us go and offer a sacrifice." God forbid, let us go and offer ketoides, let us go and pour, let us go v'nishtachava. Now this is very much related to what we learned in the previous chapter. In other words, Avodas is either kedarka, that's the first, right, v'navoid, or even if it's shaloi kedarka, but the 4 that we mentioned in the last chapter, which is what we mentioned now, just accepting something as a god, that in itself is also part of idol worship. Now again, not only did they entice, guys, next chapter we're going to learn like this, that a maces, which is the same thing, but in the Yachid, one person trying to get someone else to serve idols, that person is going to get punished even if he or she did not succeed. By Ir Nidachas, aside of everything else, they will only be put to death by skila if they got the people to worship. Veheim shoymim v'avdu v'yisedarach avidasa, or ba'achas ma'arba avodas oy shekiblua beloha. Weiter. Ir Nidachas shalei niskayim bo. There's so many qualifications. If even only one was not met, what do you do to it? Okay, so then you don't have this collective din that they are a city of idol worshippers. Everyone is judged individual. What's the din of being judged individuals regarding the worshippers? Like any other din, they have to have the hasra, and if they're edim, they're going to get skila ki yechidim, and skila is for them. But they don't lose their mamain, all of their assets. Rabbi J.J. Hecht, all of a sudden, passed away by the Levi. His kid says that normally people inherit. They said that our father left $5 million chayvus. Every child inherited another $1 million. This is chayvus from way to the kamoizdis. So whatever the father is leaving, that's of the umaynim liyarshayim. Now halacha vav, we're not done yet. When everything was mad, the heiхдin only in Eretz Yisrael. But Aaron, the beauty here is just the chap that the next chapter, you'll see maces which is just one person trying to convince another person to worship, the one who tried is going to be put to death by skila. It's amazing that over here, for them to be put to death by skila, because they are madichen, you have to meet all these qualifications. There will be a window somewhere in between where there no longer will be a mesis, and the taka won't be a madich. But that's you have to chat that. Okay, let's go back. Aside of what we mentioned above, if all of the qualifications were met, the great Beis Din is going to go and they're going to really investigate and probe until they'll find out with halachic, what halachic calls perfect proofs. That all of the city or the majority of the inhabitants went and they actually worshipped an idol, like we mentioned. Right, Kedarka, the 4 Avodas, or they declared that thing is our God. What's normally the din? Ibaraya Berura means there was already Hasra, there was already Edom. You should know that when it comes to a Beis Din punishment, never will tshuva remove the punishment other than here. That's the bomb question. Now, Achar Kach then, why? Not to put them to death. Lahaziram, Api Chasidus, to shine lichtikai, to inspire them and get them to do tshuva. And you know what says Rambam? If they do tshuva, good. Jumps the Ravid. Where do we find such a thing? Ma'olam, you never find tshuva. God knows if you did tshuva. God will, it makes a big difference. But if they did all of what the preconditions, that means there was Asra and Edom, you never find tshuva. And this is the springboard, this is a Mugadik Asicha, the Rebbe says Gavaldik. Based on many other questions, like we mentioned, the question is, if you serve idol, you get skila. Skila is the more serious punishment. If you are now going to be judged as a irani dachas, you're going to get sayif. How? If one Jew does 2 sins, chamura and kala, you get the chamura. The answer is that just like in Kedusha, you find the concept of a tzibur. Tzibur is a new mitzias. Here, once it becomes a irani dachas, they are no longer yechidim. And that's why we will find, to a certain degree, collective punishment. We're going to see that the belongings, even of the tzaddikim in the city, meaning they didn't serve idols, they won't be put to death, but their belongings will be destroyed because they are no longer yechidim. You know what tshuva does? The Rebbe says, tshuva removes the mitzias of the tzibur. And once you become yechidim, the Rebbe holds, not that tshuva will take away your death penalty, then you'll be judged with skill. But you can't paskin the din of the irani dachas only if there is a tzibur and the tshuva of the people will remove the status. That's the gist of the sikha. Neim chazal tshuva mutav. And the Rebbe holds mutav doesn't mean mutav. Of course mutav. Mutav doesn't mean that they're off scot-free. That Ivitz is right. But mutav means it's no longer irani dachas. The im yavdu be ivaltam, but if they don't do tshuva, Beis Din mitzav l'chol Yisrael alas aleim latzava. You know what they do? I mean, where do you put them to death? Beis Din gets all of the Jewish people to wage civil war against them. And all of the Yidden are obligated to go and to make a siege to that city. Listen to these words, until they breach the city walls. Now, it's not that when they enter the city, the soldiers of the rest of the Yidden will kill them. Once you get into the city, then you set up in the city many Bati Dinim, and you judge everyone, because if someone did not worship idols, in this case, that individual will not be put to death at all, even though there will be some punishment on that person's property as well. So when we said the Beis Din Hagadol means Beis Din Hagadol is leading this campaign. But you understand, the Bati Dinim will be set up in that city. He's separated. Now, nimtzu koliv del mu'uta, if after everyone that was separated, you count them. You have to make a census. If the sum total is the minority, what happens? Oh, then there's no din of irani dachas. Whoever did not worship doesn't get stoned to death, and everything else stays the way it is. The property is not going to get burnt, as we'll see. The city won't get destroyed. But nimtzu ruba oy gevalt. Now they are brought to the Beis Din Hagadol. And the Gemar din is going to be in the Great Sanhedrin. Now, furthermore, umakin kol nefesh adam asher ba lefi cherev. Taf v'nashim imut chakula. The herst, oy gewalt. In other words, you find the concept that nashim I get, but taf, see, how can you punish children? They're not bar chiyuvim. The city becomes a tzibur, just like you have in Kedusha. There has to be the opposite. Once it's judged as a unit of a tzibur, the tzibur is being judged to death. Now that's only, my friends, if everyone worshipped idols. So then even the children will be put to death. But if it's the majority, not all, but the majority, you know what happens? The wives and the children of those who worships will be put to death by sayif, by cherev. Not to other people. But whichever individual worshipped, him, Rahman al-Atzlan, his wife and his children, even if they are minors, and the minor children, the adult children are not included. The punishment, right, of the ones who led them astray makes no difference. What's the din? That once it's roiv, they get judged as madichim and they are put to death by skila. Now, on top of that, you gather all the belongings. If there's no great major, it's called Main Street. If there's no Main Street, then you make a Main Street. And if the Main Street was outside of it, then you include it in the city by extending the city walls around it, because you have to burn all of the belongings on Main Street. On top of that, all of living animals are killed. And you burn all of the belongings in fire. And burning it is a mitzvah saseh shenemar v'sorafto ba'esh es'ir v'skol shalala. Now, what happens to the property of the tzaddikim? The tzaddikim doesn't mean the tzaddik of Tanya. It doesn't even mean the Beinoni of Tanya. Tzaddikim means, in the case where there's roiv, so then even though the taf and the nashim of the ones who worshipped are going to be punished together with them, but the ones who didn't, those people, they won't be put to death. But you know what? Their belongings are burnt. Oy gewalt. That's the meaning of a tzaddik. Why? Since they live there, they did nothing. They should have convinced their peoples not to do it. There's no shiurim here. When it comes to Avodah Zarah, it's not like it's a little share. There's no share. It's beyond share. So first of all of the property is chedim. Chedim means it has to be destroyed. What happens if after all of the judgment happened, the witnesses become zoymimim? So anyone, the original owners took it back, another person took it, mutali hanis boy, they can have anah. Chedim, it's no longer chedim, because the fact that they became zoymimim, so retroactively. Hold on, but if retroactively we discovered they did not worship idols, so then it should belong to the original owners. It doesn't work that way. Because once based in Paskind, even though it was based on lying witnesses that the property is going to be burned, so the owners relinquished their ownership. And even after we undid the testimony, the original owners have to make a kinyan. And prior to them making a kinyan, anyone who takes it will own it. Oy gewalt. And therefore, without making a new kinyan, it remains hefker, even though the Edom are zoymimim, and that did affect retroactively that it's not chedem, but anyone who took it gets to keep it. Another rule, the Einanim Nisla, it may never be rebuilt, and furthermore, whoever rebuilds that city gets malchus, as it says, L'sibana oit. However, you can't rebuild it as a city, but it doesn't have to be left fallow. You can make from that city area ganois upardesim shenemar loisibana oid, implying loisibana medina k'maishahaisa, but implying that you could make use of that land for anything other than a city. Halacha 9. What happens if people are traveling through? When does someone become a resident of this location? There are many halachas. Here we have one of such halachas. Here it's 30 days. If you have an entire caravan that's going from place to place, and they happen to be going through the Irani Dachas, and as they were going through, when they stopped there, even though their intent was to move on, that was the time that everyone was fakishipt in this Avodah Zarah. If, God forbid, they participated. So the question is, guys, if they serve the Avodah Zarah, they're going to be put to death. The question is, besayif, with their wives and taf, or beskila. So I guess if they were there for 30 days, for this they become a resident. Then erogim besayif u'mamayim avad. If they were not there for 30 days, yeah, they served avodah zarah, they're going to be put to death with skila, but this city was judged as an inanidachas. But there were people in the city that were custodians from stuff that belonged to people elsewhere. Which for certain didn't makes you the owner. Another reverse scenario, what happens to the belongings that belong to the wicked? That means to the people of the city. When there was a Gemar Din, they had their car loaned to someone in another location. So that means if Beis Din will make an attempt to gather everything back prior to the burning of the shalom, but they don't delay it. You understand? If they manage to gather it back, then it gets burnt with the shalom in the city, in the main street. But if they didn't manage to bring it back, then there's no unique din later to run after everything and to destroy it. Halacha Yudalef. Behema. It wasn't the city. You could kill it. What do you do to it? You have to kill it. You have to destroy it. You know why? Because even though half of it belongs to a person that doesn't live in the city, a living animal has to be wholesome. Every Avid, you're going to cut it in half. Since the part that's asur is giving chayis to the parts that's mutter, and you can't have hana from it, so all of it becomes asur b'hana. You know why? Because it's a living animal. Contrast that with something that's a doimim. The example will be an isa. You have a dough, half belongs to a person that lives in the city, half to another city. Don't destroy all of it. Cut the dough in half. The half that belongs to another you'd give back. And the one that here has to be burnt. The isa, the same concept, meaning it belongs to partners. Then mutares. One half can live without the other half. What about sourdough? They tell me it's mamash alive. I'm just kidding. Okay.
Does he owe the money? I guess it's being put to death. It doesn't really matter. But in other words, if one guy loses half of his animals because the other half belongs to the guy in your so you can tovei him to.
I don't think so. It's you have a bad partner. Your partner schleps you down. You're not tovei him. It's just it was a bad partnership. Halacha Yud Beis. Guys, you know when? After the Gemar Din. Just add these words in. So then like this. It's Asur Mahana. Just like the din of Asher HaNizkal, we don't have time to explain, but there also, that if it has to be stoned to death, shechting it doesn't resolve with Shenishchat. However, Sa'ar HaRoish, hair, either from men and of women, right? So prior to the people being killed, let's chaparayim and make a sheitel. So the din is by hair mutabano. Aval shall pay a nachris. But if someone has a sheitel, that's called property of. That has to be destroyed. Now, the Rambam doesn't yet write the source, even though he writes not Tamim, the source, because he's going to write Halacha Yud Gimel, and the next Halacha, and this Halacha share the same source. So Rambam writes another din. If there are fruits that are connected on the trees during the Gemar Din, Mutarim, here's because the Torah says, gather everything and burn it. So Chazal learn only things that only need to be gathered and burnt, they have to be burnt. But something that's mechubar, which is fruit, first you have to detach it, then gather and burn it. Same thing with here. First you have to cut it or shave it, and then you have to gather and burn it. That's excluded. It's interesting stam to note by the Rambam. That's the Seder. He writes one din, it's another din, halacha yud gimel, and then he writes the tam, the source, not the tam for both. That you can have benefit, and what happens, they belong to the heirs. Then what about Hegdish? Hegdish means that someone in the city was magdish something already. Then you have the Gemar Din. So since the Torah says shlala, v'lo shlal shamayim, so they don't have to be burnt, but they have to be put to death. Why? If it's not included in this din of Iranidachas, because Zevach Rishoyim Toyeva, the owners are wicked, God doesn't want it. Kochavim, not livestock, guys, not livestock. Yipadu v'achakach sefer moiso. Shenemar shalala v'loi shalal shamayim. And there, so 1 second, it's not included in the din, which is why you get to redeem it. Redeem it, which means the money goes to the Beis HaMikdash.
The money also?
No. Someone should redeem it. Since it's not included in this din, We don't want the Beis HaMikdash to lose. On the other hand, since it belonged to people of the city, you burn it afterwards. Halacha Yudalet, HaBechor v'HaMaiser shebetoicha. Here's the key: Bechor and Maiser are considered your property if they are tamimim. Harem kikachim is beyach and v'yomusu. Because zevach reshoim toyeva, not because of iranidachas. If they are bali mumin, so then harayim b'chlal behemta. In other words, since necholim lebaleim, it's mamash considered halachically the property of the owners, then it has to be included in this mass burning in the rechayv ir. Truma shebetoicha. So like this, if they are already in the hands of the kohen, right? So then, on one hand, it's not called. It's called mamin baleim. It's called the own. It belongs to the kohen. Yirkavu mepnei shem lechasav. Why yirkavu? Because there's kedusha there. There's kedusha there, so you can't burn it. But on the other hand, you can leave it right now. There's always a downside with leaving it rot that maybe you're going to accidentally eat it. Then they should be given to a kohen in another city. Because if the Jew owns the truma, it's not his. It's not his. So therefore it's not included in the property of the city. And therefore, so therefore it didn't belong to you. It's like we learned before, if I have in my possession something that belongs to a person in another city, it goes back to the other city, it's not the owners. Meiser kesef v'kesef, meiser sheni, or v'kisvei ha'kodesh b'toicha. All of these cases, yes, it's called mamam baleim. It's mamam baleim. On the other hand, you can't be mavaza it by burning it with everything else. What was the solution before? By fruit? Yirkavu is only good for kaihanim because reason. But if you're not a kohen, you might inadvertently eat it. So how do you destroy it in an honorable way? You bury it. Final halacha tazayin kol ha'oisa din be'iran idachas. You should know people are hesitating. You're giving us a collective punishment, and you're going to be killing either tough people that So people are going to refrain from it. No, it's a mitzvah to do it. As it says, that by judging them and by executing them the way the Torah describes, you remove God's anger from the Jewish people. As it says, this will make God take back his kaviyachal anger. And he's going to bring upon them. It means even on the people that are getting punished. You're doing a favor for them. Doing it for you. It's for your good. Now we're going to go Chavetz late, but Perik Chamishi, if you halt cup, your mind is going to blow up over here. So Perik Chamishi is now Maces. Maces.
How many times does that happen?
Maybe never. No, there was one case. The Gemara speaks about it. Perik Chamishi has 11 halachas. Maces is much more inclusive. Maces means without all of the preconditions that we learned before, and it's a lot more chamur. If one individual, the same tribe, another tribe, the same city, another city, if he proselytized or she proselytized, they went over to one or to many and they began to convince them to serve Avodah Zarah just for the attempt, their chayiv skila, even if they didn't succeed. The Madiach, we learned, is only put to death if the people worshipped the three ways. Ka'avidasa, the four, or they declared that Mishagas is their God. Here, even if they did not succeed. So you're going to ask, Oy Bazoi, the Madiach should be punished because he's a Maces. So we'll see there's certain scenarios when you speak to the majority of the city, if you're speaking to the Roiv, you're not a Maces. Now you have to meet the criteria of the Madiach. But let's go to the Maces. A Maces, Echad Maces. Oh, different. So first of all, the Maces get the same punishment. They get the same punishment. What they're doing is the same thing. It's the same concept. But instead of trying to get the Roiv of a city, they're trying to get to one individual. A missionary, that's called a Maces. These big organizations that they try to get Rahman al-Itzlan, whole cities to convert, that's called Madichim.
If one person tries to convince a whole city, is also a Maces.
No, we'll see. No, the moment he's addressing the majority, we'll see. No, there's a window, because you're going to ask, why do I need to? I get it on the Nidachin, you have to meet all these to get killed, to lose your property, but for the one who's trying to do it, why did we learn in the last chapter that a Madiach is only chayv if he got the other people to worship? A Maces is chayv just for trying. You're going to see here. There's a window. There's a din of a Maces, a din of a Madiach. Halacha. Maces echad miyisrael denisu benish. Harei niskol. Look at this. Af al pi sheloi avad ha-Maces. Not like last chapter. Even if they did not succeed. In other words, the Maces means the proselytizer. The missionary didn't worship. That's equal to the Madichim. The Madichim also don't have to worship. But here's the key. Even if Eloi Hamusas, they failed, thank God. You know why they're being put to death? Because they instructed someone else to go worship. Guys, this is important because there's a din. You know what the din of a Navi Sheker? A Navi Sheker misasoi bechenek. So again also, here a mace is misasoi beskila. So if he tried to convince one person, so the question is, when is there chenek? We'll see. You have to know which category to put the person. Always maces, if you fall into maces, even if you are also a Navi Sheker, you're going to be put to death with skila. Like here it works because chenek and skila, what's the more chamur? Skila. That's good. Halacha base. Hametzes esrei v'anshei ha'ir. Here's the key. Once he is speaking to the majority of this people, once that happens, he's called a madiach. That answers everything. And he's no longer a mesis. I'll give you an example, guys. A mesis doesn't need hasra. A madiach needs hasra. There's different dinim. All right? A mesis we trick. We'll see what that means. A madiach you may not. Okay? A mesis that we're learning. A mesis is chayv even if they didn't succeed. Madichin, the din of a madiach is only if they succeeded. Halacha, weiter.
I mean, even if he didn't succeed, there's Adam. I don't know if there's Asra, but he himself is serving with the Zara. Right?
No. Neither the Maces or the Madiach are worshiping themselves. They're just trying to convince others.
How do you convince someone else to do something else?
No, because let's say normally they're going to be doing it themselves, but there's no Adam that they did it. But there's Adam that he tried to convince another. You're chayiv misa skilla just for trying to convince.
Why did you kill Musa?
The Musa's only going to be killed if he served. And Hanami. Okay. Right. Navi, also the din is misasei beskila. In other words, when you're trying to convince the Roiv Ha'ir, you're called a Madiach. Okay? And not the din of a Navi Sheker that bechenek. And the Hani Dachin, Harem ki Yechidim, Ve'enam kan she'er nidachas. Which, why? Because if it's only one, you understand? It means it's amazing. Even though it's only one, so whether the people will worship or not, they won't be judged b'sayif because you have to have two madichim. When do you leave maces and become a madiach? The moment you are addressing roiv anshe yoir, that's the key here. That's halacha base. Okay, weiter. And now, whatever type of approach. That idol told me to worship, or God told me he's coming b'shem Hashem to serve that idol, that star. That's called the Navi Shidiach. Navi Shidiach, again, if it's roiv, yes, the din of a Madiach. If he succeeded, he's going to be put to death. Appreciate this nuance. But a maces doesn't matter if he's speaking in the plural or even in the individual, that is in his skull. Ketzad, going back to the din of a maces, if one tells his fellow, I'm going to worship an idol. I'm going to worship an idol is convincing others, that's the big kasha. So most add that what's given, we learned the same thing in the Gemara. And join me. He didn't say worship an idol. He spoke about idolatry concerning himself. He says, I'm going to worship the star. Then when he says the words join me, that's called a maces. Or Eilech ve'avoid in the plural. We are going to go worship and join us. Now he has to specify either kedarko or esbach, Eilech ve'esbach, Neilech ve'nesbach, akater, Eilech ve'akater, Neilech ve'nakater, anasech, Eilech ve'nasech, Neilech ve'nasech, ishtach ve'elech ishtach ve'elech ishtach. The four, no matter kedarko or not, that's called a maces. Hameses l'shnayim. If someone is trying to convince two, okay, that's not roiv, din of a maces. So here, they can become the Edom. Edom you have to have. But you know what's unique about a maces? Not even by the Madiach, no hasra is needed. This is unique.
You didn't mention the third one about
Gosh, I don't know why. Oh no, we're going to have that later. I know why. That Rambam is going to speak about later. There's a difference in those. Why didn't he say, I'm a God? We'll see in a moment. That's so nadish.
He claims himself to be.
Yeah. Oh, there's plenty of those. No, right then. Omar la'echad. People don't say it. Most people think that. Omar la'echad. What happens if he says to one person? In other words, you don't have Edom. Since by a maces we want to trap him, we want to get Edom, so you trick him up. So who oimer yeshli chavedim reitzimekach? Oh, good. I like that. He's calling chavedim just to get to Edom. You can do that. Umarim alev achiyasam b'shnayim kadei lahargay. And if he's smart enough not to speak to two people directly, so then you can do other means of trickery to get to people to witness him trying to just to get you. Mitzvah lahachmin oisai, setting a trap. What's that called? And by the goyim here, there's a word for that. Entrapment. Where do we have entrapment? Only by maces. Called by proselytizers, by missionaries. Kol chayovim mises bateiram. By all the other chayovim mises. Ei machnimin aleim. Chutz mizeh. Ketzah machnimin oisai. How do you trap a person? Hamusas mevi shnayim. The person who was already solicited. He was already told. He knows that person is a proselytizer. He brings two people. And he can hide them. Now, hiding them in a place, the Edom have to see and hear. They have to see and hear. But if that guy knows Edom, he's going to be put to death, they can be standing in a place that the maces won't see them. Kedei in a makam afal. Kedei sheyiru ha-maces v'yishmu devara v'lo yira oisam v'hu oimar le-maces emor mashu mart lebi yichud. Can you please repeat what you told me? V'hu oimar lo, a guy, if he doesn't repeat it, there's no Edom, but you can try to get him to repeat it. V'hamusas me'shivoi. Now here is interesting. Why does he have to? A maces means he initiated. Here, there's a problem with this trap. He didn't initiate it. We learned that Gemara. Since he didn't initiate it, the maces has to repeat it again. How do you make him repeat it again? You have to push back. If he initiated it and it happened to be two people saw it, you don't have to have the back and forth. But since here the victim began, the musas began, so he has to push back. Now, by the way, if he pushes back and that person, the maces, is quiet, is good, pater. God will deal with him, but he won't be put to death. But if he counters, now this response, it's considered an initiation. We got you. And we stone him. Who should be the one putting him to death? The one who was the one who was being proselytized. As it says, and as we learned, but we're going to learn later at the end of Rambam, that when they put the person on the two-story building, like who pushes him off? The Musas.
Isn't it the Edom?
No, not here. Here the Musas.
This is the Edom. No,
it could be, but it doesn't have to be.
Here the Musas. Very good.
Meet two other Edom besides yourself.
You can be. No. You can be the Eid. Mesas l'shnaim hareim Edav. The Rambam wrote all that. Okay, right. Now, what about emotions? The Musas should not love the Maces. What's it called? Stockholm syndrome? When someone is trying to get you to do something bad, and they convinced you, they must be someone great because they convinced me. So you have a certain, don't have any covet, don't have any love to him. Right? If someone's soina has an animal that you must unload, normally you have to even help your animal. So Yachol, you would think, help this guy not. Don't have compassion for him. And if you know something else, so here's a pasuk in Re'ei v'chol Yisrael yishmu v'yiraun l'choira. The Girsam that Rambam should be, because that's not a source. It says v'lo yosifon oid lasois. That lasois means not to be a mesis. Halacha hey hamesis achedim la'avdoi. Here you go. That's your question, Shuki. Why didn't Rambam mention worship me? If someone tells others worship me, Ivduni. So obviously, if they worshipped him, he's niskal. If they did not worship him, such a narash guy, even if they said, you know what? We will. Einoi niskal. Why? Because meshatani b'cha. Sometimes when you hear something so narish, worship me as a God, yeah, sure. But that's only when a person is speaking about himself. Go worship Yashke, a great example. The moment they were makabel and they said, we will, hey, neilach v'navid, afa b'shadayim lo yavad, shneim niskolim, ha-mesis v'ha-musas, shenema l'shoy v'loy l'shishma elav, ha'im shama v'ava, you're already chayiv. Okay, Navi, ha-misnabi b'shem Avodas Kochavim ketzat. So now let's go define the case of a Navi sheker. Now don't forget, if a Navi is speaking to the Roiv of a city, he's going to be nidoin as a Madiach with skila. But there is a din of chenek. Where's that? If he's coming in the name of a god, that star, that Oivet Kochavim or that Kochav, that mitzvah lasis kach v'kach ashaloi lasis. And even if the message that he came in the name of an idol was to keep a mitzvah, no, it's different than the musas is dafka when you're telling someone to worship an idol. Here he's coming in the name of a getchka. Even if he's saying, put on tefillin. Now you get the concept of, so in other words, every Navi Sheket is a mesis, ain't a chanami. Navi Sheket is when he's not telling you to worship an idol. He's coming b'shem an idol. Chenek. If there were two witnesses, and this is the parsha shoiftim, va'asher yedaber b'shem Elohim acherim. No matter what he says, even to do the right thing, umeis hanavi yahu. And where do we have the hazara for him in Parshas Mishpatim, where it says v'shem Elohim acherim lo yisaskiru. Halacha zayin va'asur la'arich din tshuva imam esnabe. Don't enter a debate when someone is coming in the name of an idol. If a missionary, that's what missionaries see. A missionary coming with Christianity is both, is everything. He's coming in the name of he's coming in the name of a false deity, and he's telling us to participate in with a false deity. Not a lot of debate with them. Don't ask of him a oisor or moifis. And even if he did a wonder or a miracle, don't pay attention to it. Like we learned before, don't even garnish. He did a trick. Maybe it's emes, that in itself, just thinking about it, it says in Parshas Riyeh, the VA sheker, misasi bechenek, you may not listen. What happens to him? Put him to death by strangulation. Oh, but there's another case. Even if he's misnabi b'shem Hashem, another din. What's another din of a Navi sheker? Also chenek, if he's coming in the name of God, but it's not true. If we know it's not true, if we were to know. Even again, even if he's not adding to the mitzvahs, but God told me to tell you it's not true, chenek. What does it mean it's not true? Whether he's giving over a prophecy, what he did not hear through those prophetic dreams. Even better. What happens if you have two people? Reuven is a Navi, Shimon is not. God comes to Reuven with a message to give to the people. Shimon knows about that message. Reuven told it to Shimon. Shimon is the mouthpiece, but instead of him saying God came to Reuven with a message, the message came from God. But Shimon says, God told me to tell you, in other words, it was not told to him, that's a Navi, and misase bechenek. Wow. Now you get, so if he's telling other people to serve Avodah Zarah, he might have a din of a mesis, he might have a din of a Madiach, right? When are you a Navi sheker? Now we're learning the din of a Navi sheker. Halacha test. Or how do we know? That's the question. Yeah. But I'm saying if we were to know, doesn't mean we'll know. Very good. How will I know that God did not come to him? He's not being moisif. I don't know. But the misase bechenek. Halacha test. Kol minei. When Chazal say that even though that there's no more Sanhedrin, so din arba miso is leibatlu. Remember that Gemara? It's God sees to it that if someone is chayv to be death by chenek, askero, the Gemara says. That's all right. He'll be strangled to death. So if God knows he's chayv chenek, he'll choke to death. Halacha test.
But if Shem has to be killed through Eidos, how do the two Eidim know that?
That's what David is saying. They don't know. We don't know. But if someone is chayv chenek, and Beis Din, there's no Beis Din, so the Chazal say God will make sure that his death will be a chenek type of death. That will happen to him. Allah test. Because the Navi Sheker is someone that's very great. In other words, why? He's someone who's worthy to be a prophet. In other words, even though this is a great Jew, because he's worthy to be a prophet, and therefore you are afraid to kill him, then you are violating a negative commandment. The Torah says don't fear him. If you know somehow to bring more guilt upon him and you don't do it, or if you are afraid of his words, then you are violating Leisagar Mimenu. By the way, there are times that you could know. L'mashal, if the Navi Sheker is coming b'Shem Avodas Kochavim, that you know. Or if he's saying b'Shem Hashem to take away permanently, then you know. Okay, halacha yud. A new din. The next two halachas are two details. Hanoider b'Shem Avodas Kochavim. Not Navi, you're vowing. Or you're swearing in the name of Yashke, Loike, Shenemar, as it says, V'Shem Elim Achedim Lo Yisaskiru. Wow. Normally what the din is, normally you don't get Malchus, only you do a Maisa. Right? But since for Shvua Shav, in the name of God, you get Malchus, that's the Rambam's limud, so by Shvua, here also. Another din, let's say if I have a partnership with a guy, and I want him to take an oath, I can't tell him swear in the name of your God. I can't cause him to take an oath. Even just to mention a name of an idol is normally asur, as it says, final halacha, you can't even tell to your chaver, wait for me in the side of that idol, side of that statue. Can't do that. You know why? It says, because you're mentioning the idol. It says, V'sheim Elohim Achedim Lo Yisaskiru, with an exception. All of the idols whose names are mentioned in the Torah, then you can mention it. Anywhere in Tanakh, then you can mention the name, like Pa'oir, or Baal, or Baal, or Nevoy, God, the Chayotze Behen. Chassidus explains, the Rebbe explains, because since they are mentioned in the Torah was mevatel their koyach. The Torah was megala their naroshkeit. So, for also ligram lachedem sheidru. Not only that, you cannot cause other people that they should make a neder. The word sheyekaimu means an oath. V'sheyekaimu, they should take a shvua in the name of Avodas Kochavim. Now says the Rambam that everything, all of the details that we learned in the final two halachas, ve'eino loika, but Malchus, we mentioned many details. Malchus is only hanoide b'shma v'amakayim b'shma. Someone who actually took an oath or swore for who? Hanishbar b'shma. My word.
To be able to trap him, are you allowed to mention the idol's name?
No, but you tell him, please repeat to me. I was thinking about, what were you telling me yesterday? That's how you trap.
Well, what's the only way you can trap him?
Then don't do it. Right. Halacha, the final chapter, Perek Shishi.
Where's the switch for this? For this last one, where you're not supposed to wait by this deity. Not supposed to? You
can't say the name of an Avodah Zarah.
See the name of it, you just point to it.
So like this, there's other dinim, not to have benefit, the Rambam doesn't mention it. We paskin, the Rambam doesn't say it, that I can't even use a church as a simon. Make a left by the church, don't say that, but that's the Rambam is not talking about that over here. Let's go back to Perek Shishi Chevra. Now, it's fascinating, Chevra, fascinating, because those of us who learned, and we should all learn, the Gemara and Sanhedrin, we're going to learn about many different types of specific Avodah Zarahs. Oiv Yedoini Moilech Matseva Evan Maskis. And Moilech. And there's everyone, the Rambam defines what it is. These are all practices that we may not engage in. We're not allowed to learn about idol worship, so the Rambam already said before that you're going to become a judge. You're going to learn enough Torah, you'll qualify to be a dayan in the Sanhedrin. You have to know that if someone is being judged because they did oiv, you have to know what it is. In that context. We're not learning it because we're so chas v'shalom for anything other than to know what it is, to know whether someone violated or not. Halacha Aleph. Ha'oisa oiv. We'll explain what that means. The practice of an oiv, or the practice of yidoini. If a person did it b'retzoinei b'zadim, chayv kares. And if there's Edom and Asra, Chayv Skila. If a person did it B'shoigik, Chatos Kavua. So let's go. Kate said, this is a typical, specific type of idol worship. Kate said, Umayso Ha'oiv. So like this. Zeshu Oimer Umaktir Ketoiris Yodua. So there's a certain known type of incense. All of these things had what we call today drugs. They had a narcotic effect because they put the person into some type of trance. Right? Va'oiches, people who Rahman al-Islam take drugs, they take mushrooms, they say, wow, I had a spiritual experience. All the old Oivdei Kochavim, they did that. Va'oiches sharvet shel hadas umanifoi, the goyim with kishuf, the wand, the waving the wand, that's these narashkainen comes, and they would hold myrtles and they would wave it. And this person who's now inside of the smoke of that type of these are all drugs. These are shmekachts that's making you high. And there were certain known incantations that they would say, and they would do it until the one who's asking the one who's drugged up, the one who's in this trance, begins to hear a voice of someone responding to every question that he's asking. Where is the response coming from? Under the ground. Don't be this small, big deal. But that was this Avodah Zarah. And the voice that's coming from under the ground is not the way we speak to each other. You're not hearing it with your ears, you're hearing it in your mind. All right?
So it's a real sound?
Well, let me go like this. You know, it's good that in English, Avodah Zarah, Chayiv Skila, here you're stoned, then you worship the idol. Not idol, stoned idol. Then you're stoned again, literally, biblically. It's not ki'ilu. Whatever this is, I don't know and I don't care. But just to know what the Rambam is describing, it's as if you're hearing it, but you're not really hearing it. But you feel it in your brain. That's one type of oiv. Another type of oiv, because when we learn the Gemara, it's about bones. So first of all, you're not using other than the samanim and the incantations and the waving of the wand. Now there's a bone involved.
And no one hears this.
No, the one who's doing it hears it.
There's no witnesses.
One second. So how do you get witnesses? You see him doing it.
Meditation.
This is called transcendental. That's how I do it. Oh, they used to use a skull. Now you see why the Goyim love these skulls. Mamash, it comes from Avodah Zarah. These are skull, and you offer incense to the skull. And same thing, there's certain incantations, there's certain things you have to do. Now, when you're talking to the skull, the sound doesn't come from the skull. The sound is coming from under your, the practitioner's armpit. And again, shuffle ad mu'oid, very low. Very low because the other people are not hearing it. So you're telling them, no, you're not hearing it. I'm hearing it. And the voice is, there's a conversation going on.
But how can you trust what they're saying?
You don't say, whoever does this, call Elo Maisa Oifim. Let's go weiter.
Are they punished for magic and for...
No, this is called Avodah. In other words, Oiv is included in Avodah Zarah.
Nothing to do with magic, even if
it's borderline, but the point is Yechayiv Skila. Let's go weiter. Halacha base. So don't say, I'm not going to say Avodah Zarah, I'm not going to say magic. You know, Shmuley, Oiv. The Torah says, don't practice Oiv. What's Yidoini? So it says that there's a bird called Yadua. You get it? Yadoini. The bird is called Yadua. You put the bone in your mouth. And here again, umakted, you offer incense, which makes you high in Mistama. And you do certain activities until you enter into an epileptic type of seizure. In other words, that's called, you connect to something that's lamata mitam vadas. And once the person is in that trance, he begins to speak the future. And I want you to know that I forgot Rashi, or maybe when we were learning this in the Gemara, the one who's then in this trance, when they're speaking, their lips are not moving. Their mouth is not moving. The sound is coming from the bone that's in their mouth. That's why until today, all of these shtusim, the guy with the puppet, and that talking and not talking, that all is sourced. All these tricks are the same. By Shmuley. This is, the Rambam says, not Kishuv. The Rambam doesn't believe in Kishuv. This is Avodah Zarah. This is mini Avodah Zarah. It says in Kedoshim, Al tifnu ela avis v'ela hayedoinim. Even though that the pshat is, you don't go to them, but this is for you not to practice it. Halacha Gimel, Moilech. What's Moilech? Big machlek is what Moilech is. Listen to this. Hanoisem is Moilech, one who willingly gives over his child to this idol worship practice called Moilech. If he does it, b'ritzoynei u b'zaden chayv kares. If it was not b'shoigig, maybe chatas kavua. However, and v'imasa be'edem v'masra niskal. Stam lohoid that the Rambam in the beginning of this chapter went through the seder of kares, skila, chatos. What's the seder here? I don't know why it's different. Weiter. Shenemer, as it says, even skila, surely he shall be put to death. And where did the Torah warn against the practice of Moilech? As it says, so this Mavra is an expansion of, is an expounding of the meaning of Moilech. What's Moilech? This is the Rambam's understanding of Moilech. Madlik eish gedoyla, that they would light a big fire. V'lekeach miksa zaroi, and the person would give over not all of his children. And by the way, if he only has one child, giving over one child, you learn that in the Gemara, is all the children. He has two or more children. He only gives some of them over to the kohanim, who are fire worshippers. And then that kohen gives the child back to the father after the father gave over the child to that priest in order for him to be led through the fire by the father. That's what's going on over here. In other words, it's not that the priest, it's all these steps. He gives him over to the priest. How long does the priest hold on to the kid? I don't know. But then the priest gives the child back to the father. And then, then with the permission of, under the direction of those worshippers, the father is going to lead his son through the fire. Now listen, there's so many opinions that Rambam holds, I'm saying by heart, that it's actually walking through the fire, not in a way where anyone gets burnt. In other words, that was the way they practiced it. And the child is not on the ground. Passed over means the child is on the shoulders of the father, or the father is holding in the hands. The fire, people they put the finger through the fire. All this is all Avodas Zarah and Shtusim. So they walk through the fire quickly. That was the practice. And the father is walking on the ground, not the child. The father is walking through the fire, through the flames, and very important, it's not that the father is burning his child to this idol, as other people did that also. They burnt their children to their idols. No, that's something else. Here, it's B'havara Bilvad, and that avoid is called Moilach. And he says, Lefikach ha'oisa avoida zul averes kichav macheres chutz me'moilach, you're going to be pater. What's Lefikach Shuki? What did we learn before? That if you do one of the four, even though Shaloi Kedarach Avoidasa, what's one of the four? Maktir. So if someone burns his child, a side of murder, he was maktir, even if it's Shaloi Kedarach. The reason why that Rambam is paskening that you're only chayiv if you did it to the moilach, because you're not being maktir. You're only walking through. So it's only Kedarach Avoidasa to the Avodas Zarah called moilach. Gavaldik. Halachadal. Huh? Okay. Eina chayiv karas eskila ad. And the father is walking through the the child is being passed through. That's the way that child being passed through means the child is not on the ground, the child is being held by the father. What happens if if anything was deviated from their the way they worship, then you're patted. Also but that's the mem in the Chumash. Halacha 5.
Is he liable, Rabbi, or just the father?
The father is liable. The child, yeah. The child was passive.
If the child is above bar mitzvah,
he's also not going to be held. He didn't do anything. He was being walked through. He was passive. He didn't do an action. The father did the action. Halacha 5. A child means zera kosher, zera apostle, a person, God forbid, committed adultery as a mamzer. It's also his child. Echad banav ubenaisav, child, grandchild, great-grandchild. Here, child means any of your descendants. Who chayv, because they're called your zera. Avalim hevet echa, but if a person walked through his brother or his sister or his father, or he hevet atzmai, however he did that, patur, hevet echad mizarai, but the child was sleeping while the child was walked through, or the child is blind, then the father is going to be patur. Let's go right. Next din. So we learned oiv, yudoini, moilech, matzeva. We mentioned matzeva means that we may not erect a monument whose purpose is for people to gather even in giving cover to God, not through a monument. Matzeva she'asratoy hi binyan sha'akol miskaptzem etzla. You build a building in order for people to gather around the building, even if they are gathering in order to serve God. So why can't you do it? Because that was the way of people who worshipped idols. They would build monuments to gather people to worship the idol. So it's in other words, the Rambam is saying that this is a biblical commandment, almost like God making a siyag. But it's not that way, but let's go weiter. Shenemar, as it says in Shoiftim, leisakim lecha matzeva. Chala make a matzeva. So what's the chiyuv? Who is violating? People that are gathering, they're gathering for God. The one who built a monument is like moving on to the next. According to the Rambam, this is all connected to Avodas Zarah. Even maskis means a stone upon which to prostrate oneself. Even maskis. Even if one is actually going to be bowing down to God, the bower, not the stone placer. You can put a marble store on your floor, a stone floor, but if someone bows on, now, in the Beis HaMikdash, Beis HaMikdash is an exception. In the Beis HaMikdash, the store was made out of stone. Other than in the temple, if a person bows down to God, what does bowing down mean, Yaakov? Not the way we bow down on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. This bowing down means Pishut Yadayim V'Raglayim, extending your hands and your feet. Superman, verstehst? Now, whether the hands go straight or whether the hand goes to the side, but by our minig, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the knees are bent. Even there, you should not put your head on the stone. We'll get to the details in a moment. Your Chayiv Malkas, as it says at the end of Parshas Bahar, the Evan Maskis, don't put in your land, which excludes the Beis HaMikdash, Lishtach V'Yisrael. Now, you're bowing down to God. Excuse me. Laniach Evan Lefonel. Since idol worshippers would place a stone floor in front of the idol to bow down on it, that's why the Rebbe says everything is in the reverse. That since this is the way you bow down to God on the Azara, so people who worship idols are trying to take this practice for Avodas Kochavim. That's why they built a matzeva, because the Beis HaMikdash is a place to gather. When a person fully extends their hands and their feet, and that person is completely laying on it, that's called ishtachava. Whenever the Torah says bowing down, ishtachava means pishut yadayim v'raglayim. Halacha 7. But in the holy temple area, muter lishtachvis al avanim. Right? It's not really an avodah, but it's a shenemar ba'artzechem. From there we learn ba'artzechem yatem mishtachvim al avonim, aval yatem mishtachvim al avonim amifutzolos. Mifutzol means they were cut out. They were made stones that were laid in the Beis HaMikdash. And since we're not allowed to bow down to God on stone floors, Nahagol Kol Yisrael, many synagogues in the times of the Rambam had marble floors. So they would also put machzelois, b'batei knesiyos, they would put mats haratzufis ba'avanim that were floored with stone. Another, now the Rambam adds a nuance. When a person is bowing down, the most problematic part of the body that's touching the ground, bowing down means extend your hands and your feet. But what's the main issur for the head to touch the floor? I'm saying this all because Tachlon used to be done, the Pishut Yadayim V'Raglayim. We learned that in the Gemara. And then when they did it, they would put something in between the forehead and the floor. Even though now we don't do Pishut Yadayim V'Raglayim, but even when we lean on our arms, we don't lean on our arm, we have a beged. Because when we used to do the real Tachlon, laying on the ground, Nefilas Apayim, we would put something in between the forehead and the ground.
Why would you stop?
Because it's a very powerful prayer, and everything we ask for should come to fruition. And if someone witnesses someone doing it that way and it doesn't come to fruition, they're going to be moitzi las on the power of prayer. And that's only, with all the details, it's only a prayer that will come to fruition if someone was not mafsik from Shemona Esrei until when they did Nefilas Apayim. That was the whole story that Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon, right? He was put into a chedem, and his wife used to make him mishug every day, so he should say a word. So he shouldn't daven when he doesn't feel a sapayim on his colleagues. And if there's nothing to put in between his forehead, between his face, then he should go and bow down in another location, not in the shul, even though you want to daven with a minyan. Or shoicha al tzida yomate, he should lie on the side in order for his face not to be pressed into stone. That was Abaye and Rava that the Gemara speaks about. If a person bows down but they didn't fully prostrate themselves, they're not loikem. But they're not scot-free. They get rabbinic flogging. That knows when do you only get makas mardus because you didn't do mamish bowing down. That's because you're bowing down to God. But if a person, God forbid, if a person is bowing down to an idol, whether he did the real hashtachava, which is pishut yadayim v'raglayim, or even if he bowed down without fully extending his hands and his feet, from the moment he buries his face in the ground, you can be on his knees. Ooh, he gets stoned to death. Halacha test. Now we're learning about planting trees. If you plant a tree near the Mizbeach, or actually if you plant a tree anywhere in the Azara area, whether it's a non-fruit producing tree, whether it is a fruit producing tree, even if you built it to beautify the holy temple, and you beautified it, you made it for beauty, and you planted it right, Harei ze loike. Wow. Shenemar loisitu l'cha asheda. But asheda means an idol tree. Not even an idol tree. God says any tree near my altar. Why? The Rambam again. The Rambam links all of this to practices of Avodas Kochavim. Why would they plant the trees to gather the people? Like we learned by the Matzeva. Now, final halacha. Says the Rambam, Oy Gavalt, it's late. Also, La'asois achasadrois shalates, and achsadra is a room that's almost closed from all the sides, right? Some of them had the roof, some of them did not have roofs, but it's a three-side, it's an enclosed area. You cannot make one in the Beis HaMikdash the way you make them in courtyards, meaning made out of wood. In other words, the Torah speaks about not planting trees. Here we're adding, a building out of wood is also asur. Afapishu b'binyan. It's a wood building and it's not planted. Why? Because we have to keep so far away from building a tree, from planting a tree. Harcharka you say to here. It says in Shoftim kol eitz. Okay, guys, shenemar means it's a biblical harcharka. Elo kol ho'achsadrois, all of these types of porches and hasivachis, other structures that were coming out of the walls that were in the Beis HaMikdash were made out of stone and not made out of wood. And just to conclude, Bekitzer, what's the big topic here? You know what the big topic is? Sukkah in the Beis HaMikdash. So sukkahs. We make sukkahs out of wood. They didn't have the materials that we have today. The Rebbe wrote a letter. I'm going back many years ago. Aside of the Rebbe telling that the shiyarei hamanachos did not need to be eaten in a sukkah. Aside of that topic, the Rebbe says that they built sukkahs in the Beis HaMikdash because the Rambam is medayik kederech she'oisen b'chatzeros. Now, he's speaking about a structure that's affixed to the building, that's there permanently. A sukkah by default is not what people build in the backyards, and therefore a sukkah out of wood was allowed to be built in the Beis HaMikdash. We know that in Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, they built porches. There were many things Chazal speak about that were made out of wood because they're not something permanent as the Rambam is describing over here, to be continued.
Although they gathered around, especially in such they gathered.
Correct, but that was the God.